The Indomitable Miss Hepburn, a complete biography of Katharine Hepburn. Introduction, the unlikeliest star. She was too tall, too gawky, too freckled, too opinionated, and far too fond of wearing trousers in an era when women were expected to be demure and glamorous. By every conventional measure of Hollywood stardom, Katharine Hepburn should have failed. Instead, she became the greatest female screen legend in American cinema history, collecting a record 4 Academy Awards for Best Actress from 12 nominations over a career that spanned an astonishing 62 years. She starred in classics ranging from The Philadelphia Story to The African Queen to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and she did it all on her own terms, refusing to play the studio system's games, refusing to marry for convenience, and refusing to be anything other than herself. This is the story of how a defiant Connecticut tomboy became an icon of independence and excellence. Chapter 1, The Hepburn Household, a Progressive Upbringing. Katharine Hepburn was born on May 12, 1907, in Hartford, Connecticut, into a family that was anything but conventional. Her father, Dr. Thomas Norval Hepburn, was a prominent urologist and surgeon who campaigned publicly to educate the public about venereal disease, a subject considered so scandalous at the time that most doctors refused to discuss it. He believed that ignorance was the enemy of health, and he paid for pamphlets out of his own pocket to distribute to the poor. His crusading spirit deeply influenced his daughter. Her mother, Catherine Martha Houghton, was an even more formidable figure. She was a fierce suffragist who led the Connecticut Woman's Suffrage Association and worked alongside the legendary birth control activist Margaret Sanger. When Katharine was a child, her mother would take her to suffrage rallies and feminist meetings, instilling in her from the earliest age a belief that women were equal to men in every respect. "My mother was absolutely fearless," Hepburn later recalled. "She taught me that you could do anything you wanted to do." Both parents were progressive crusaders who encouraged their 6 children. Katharine was the second of 6, with 4 brothers and 1 sister, to think freely, debate openly, and speak the truth without fear. The household was filled with intellectual discussion, political argument, and a spirit of inquiry. Dinner table conversations ranged from women's rights to public health to literature and philosophy. The Hepburn children were taught never to accept anything at face value, and to question authority at every turn. The young Katharine, a self-described tomboy who called herself Jimmy and kept her hair cropped short, was raised to push her mind and body to their limits. Her father taught the children to swim, run, dive, wrestle, and play golf and tennis. She became a skilled golfer, reaching the semi-finals of the Connecticut Young Women's Golf Championship, and maintained a lifelong belief that cold water was good for the constitution, taking brisk dips in Long Island Sound well into her 80s. She also developed a love of the outdoors that would stay with her forever. She considered the natural world her sanctuary and retreat. Chapter 2, Tragedy Strikes, The Death of Tom. This happy and stimulating childhood was shattered in 1921 when 13-year-old Katharine discovered her beloved older brother Tom dead, apparently by suicide. He had been only 15. The family refused to accept suicide as the explanation, insisting his death had been a tragic accident from a misadventure. The trauma plunged young Katharine into a deep depression that lasted for years. She withdrew from other children, left school, and was tutored privately at home. So profound was her grief that for many years she used Tom's birthday, November 8th, as her own, only revealing her true birth date in her 1991 autobiography. The psychological impact of Tom's death was immense. She later wrote that she felt responsible for not having been there to save him, and she carried this guilt with her for decades. It was during this period of isolation that she developed the fierce self-reliance and emotional armor that would characterize her throughout her life. She learned to depend on no one but herself, a lesson she would never forget. "I was a very strange girl," she admitted later. "The death of my brother made me very independent. I realized that life is uncertain, and I had better do what I want." Her parents, deeply worried about her mental state, arranged for her to be tutored at home for 2 years. She emerged from this period with a renewed determination to live life on her own terms, but also with a certain emotional guardedness that she would maintain for the rest of her life. She rarely discussed Tom's death publicly, and only acknowledged it in her autobiography late in life. The tragedy shaped her profoundly and gave her a philosophical acceptance of life's cruelties that served her well in the unpredictable world of show business. Chapter 3: Bryn Mawr and the Discovery of Acting. In 1924, at the age of 17, Hepburn enrolled at Bryn Mawr College, primarily to satisfy her mother, who was an alumna. At first, she was deeply uncomfortable and struggled academically. She was socially awkward, still grieving for her brother, and found the rigid social structure of the women's college stifling. She spent much of her first year feeling like an outsider. It was a production of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew in her sophomore year that changed everything. She was assigned a small role, but it was enough to ignite a passion. She discovered that on stage, she could be someone else, could shed her shyness and awkwardness, and become powerful and articulate. Acting, she later said, was the only thing that made me feel alive. Roles in college plays were conditional on good grades, so she worked tirelessly to improve her marks in order to continue performing. A lead role in a production of The Woman in the Moon in her senior year received such a positive response that it cemented her determination to pursue a theatrical career. But Hepburn was no naive dreamer. She approached her career with the same practical, headstrong determination she had learned from her parents. She graduated in 1928 with a degree in history and philosophy, but she had no intention of becoming a teacher or a scholar. She had a plan: she would conquer Broadway. "I decided to become an actress," she said, "because I knew I was good at it. It wasn't a whim. It was a conviction." Chapter 4: The Grueling Apprenticeship, Broadway Rejection and Persistence. The day after graduating, Hepburn boldly traveled to Baltimore to meet a producer running a repertory theater company and convinced him to cast her. Her Broadway debut came in November 1928 in a play called These Days, which closed after just 8 performances. It was a devastating blow, but she refused to be defeated. Instead, she worked as an understudy and took small roles in stock companies, often facing brutal setbacks. She was fired multiple times, once from a play after the playwright declared she looks a fright, her manner is objectionable, and she has no talent, but she was rehired when no other actress could be found. She was paid $35 a week, barely enough to survive, and she often went hungry. She also experienced a brief and unhappy marriage during this period. In 1928, she married Ludlow Ogden Smith, a wealthy socialite and friend of her brother. The marriage was a disaster from the start. She refused to take his name, insisted on maintaining her independence, and found the social obligations of being a wealthy wife suffocating. After just a few years, the couple separated, and they were divorced in 1934. Hepburn never remarried, famously stating that marriage was an institution she wanted no part of. She and Smith remained friends, however, and he continued to support her career financially during her early struggling years. Her breakthrough finally came in 1932 with The Warrior's Husband, a comedy set in the land of the Amazons that required her to enter the stage carrying a large stag on her shoulders and leaping down a flight of steps. The athleticism and energy she brought to the role made her the talk of New York. Critics raved about her electric presence and magnificent physicality. It also caught the attention of Hollywood, and soon she was offered a screen test. Chapter 5: Conquering Hollywood, the First Oscar. An RKO talent scout was so impressed by Hepburn's performance in The Warrior's Husband that he offered her a screen test. Hepburn, who had no particular interest in Hollywood, demanded what she considered an absurd salary of $1,500 per week, assuming the studio would refuse. To her surprise, they agreed, and she was on her way to California. She made an impressive film debut in George Cukor's A Bill of Divorcement, 1932, starring opposite John Barrymore. Cukor, the great director, immediately recognized her unique qualities and became her lifelong friend and favorite collaborator. Her third film, Morning Glory, 1933, in which she played an aspiring actress who rejects romance for her career, won her the Academy Award for Best Actress. She was just 26 years old. That same year, she starred as the beloved Jo in the classic adaptation of Little Women, which broke box office records and cemented her status as a major star. However, her off-screen behavior was as notable as her on-screen performances. In an era when actresses were expected to exude glamour at all times, Hepburn refused to wear makeup when not working, wore trousers in public, which was considered scandalous, and declined interviews and autograph requests. She once quipped to a group of fans who demanded an autograph, "Beat it, go sit on a tack." When the costume department stole her slacks, she walked around the studio in her underwear until they were returned. She refused to play the game. She refused to be a Hollywood product. Chapter 6, The Downfall, Box Office Poison. Despite her early success, Hepburn's career hit a rough patch in the late 1930s. A much publicized return to Broadway in the late 1933 was a notorious flop, prompting Dorothy Parker's famous quip that Hepburn ran the gamut of emotions from A to B. Her film choices also grew questionable. While she earned praise for her comedic performances opposite Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby, 1938, and Holiday, 1938, audiences failed to respond. The films lost money, and Hepburn was blamed. The public, it seemed, did not know what to make of her. She was too intelligent, too angular, too athletic, too unromantic. In 1938, a group of leading film exhibitors published a list of actors deemed box office poison. Hepburn's name was at the top. Her career was in serious jeopardy. She was publicly humiliated, and many in Hollywood considered her finished. But Hepburn refused to accept defeat. "I had a nice career," she later said. "But it didn't work out. That's life. I never thought about quitting. I just thought about what I was going to do next." In a masterstroke of independent thinking, she returned to Broadway in a play written specifically for her by Philip Barry. The Philadelphia Story was a comedy about a socialite whose ex-husband tries to win her back. It was a huge hit on Broadway, and Hepburn had the foresight to purchase the film rights. She then sold them to MGM on the condition that she would star in the film adaptation and have final approval over the director and co-stars. She demanded, and got, Cary Grant and James Stewart. The 1940 film version was a massive critical and commercial success. It jump-started her Hollywood career and earned her a third Academy Award nomination. Hepburn had saved herself, brilliantly and decisively. Chapter 7, The Love of Her Life, Spencer Tracy. In 1942, Hepburn was cast opposite Spencer Tracy in Woman of the Year. It was the beginning of one of the most legendary pairings in film history. The two were an on-screen match unlike any other, she the patrician, intelligent aristocrat, he the rugged, working-class everyman. Off-screen, they fell deeply in love. There was only one problem. Tracy was a devout Roman Catholic who refused to divorce his wife, Louise, with whom he had a deaf son named John. Tracy suffered from severe alcoholism, depression, and guilt, and his marriage was a source of profound anguish. Hepburn, who had been briefly married and divorced in 1934, accepted the situation completely. She never pressured him to leave his wife, never complained about the secrecy, and devoted herself to caring for him through his many crises. Their relationship was both passionate and stormy. Tracy could be difficult, moody, and belligerent, especially when drinking, and Hepburn was his equal in stubbornness and temper. They fought fiercely, but they also loved fiercely. She once said, "I didn't want to be married to him. I wanted to be with him." There's a difference. For nearly 3 decades, until Tracy's death, She was his anchor and his home. They made 9 films together over 25 years, including Adam's Rib, 1949, Pat and Mike, 1952, and Desk Set, 1957. Their chemistry was so palpable that it transcended the screen, creating a template for the battle of the sexes comedy that influenced generations of filmmakers. Tracy once described their partnership simply, "She's the best actress I've ever worked with. And she takes no guff from me. That's why I like her." Hepburn suspended her own career for nearly 5 years to nurse Tracy through his final illness. When he died, on June 10, 1967, it was just days after they had completed work on their final film together, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Hepburn won her second Academy Award for her role in the film, but always felt the award was more a tribute to Tracy. She later wrote, "I loved him. He was the greatest man I ever met. And I cannot imagine my life without him." Chapter 8, The African Queen, Adventures in the Jungle. In 1951, Hepburn traveled to the Belgian Congo to film John Huston's The African Queen alongside Humphrey Bogart. It was one of the most difficult shoots in cinema history. The location was remote, the heat was unbearable, and the conditions were primitive. Hepburn contracted dysentery, suffered from leeches, and endured constant insect bites, all while maintaining her professionalism and her trademark good humor. Bogart later joked that he survived the shoot by drinking whiskey, while Hepburn, who refused to drink, suffered through the whole experience sober and miserable. She refused to complain, however, and developed a deep respect for Huston's filmmaking even as she found him personally exasperating. Her performance as Rose Sayer, a prim missionary who transforms into a steely, resourceful survivor, earned her a 5th Academy Award nomination and became one of her most cherished roles. "The African Queen was the greatest adventure of my life," she later said. "I loved every minute of it, even the dysentery." Chapter 9, Howard Hughes and Other Affairs. While her relationship with Spencer Tracy is the most famous of her romances, Hepburn had many other significant affairs. Most notable was her relationship with the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes, which began in the 1930s. Hughes was infatuated with Hepburn and pursued her relentlessly, showering her with attention and gifts. He even piloted a plane himself to fly her across the country. But Hepburn was not impressed by his wealth and found his obsessive behavior suffocating. She ended the relationship after a few years, much to Hughes's chagrin. She also had relationships with the director Leland Hayward, the playwright Philip Barry, and the producer Dor Shari. All her relationships were characterized by her insistence on independence. She refused to be defined by any man or to subordinate her career to anyone else's. "I'm not going to be owned by anyone," she declared. "I'm not a house. I'm a person." Chapter 10, The Lion in Winter and the Golden Years. Following Spencer Tracy's death in 1967, Hepburn channeled her grief and formidable talents into her work. She won her 3rd Academy Award for her ferocious performance as the aging, scheming Eleanor of Aquitaine in The Lion in Winter, 1968, tying with Barbra Streisand for the award that year. With this victory, she became the first actor to win 3 Oscars. She continued to defy expectations by accepting the role of Coco Chanel in a Broadway musical, Coco, in 1969. Despite her famous lack of singing ability, she was, by her own admission, tone deaf. She performed for over 300 shows, proving she could conquer any medium she chose. Critics were divided, but audiences adored her, and she received a Tony nomination. Chapter 11, On Golden Pond, a record 4th Oscar. In 1981, at the age of 74, Hepburn starred opposite Henry Fonda in On Golden Pond. The film, about a long-married New England couple confronting aging, reconciliation, and mortality, was a massive critical and commercial hit. It earned Hepburn her 4th Academy Award, making her the only performer to win 4 competitive acting Oscars, a record she held until 2023. Hepburn and Fonda, old friends from their theater days, had a warm and playful relationship on set, but the production was also filled with tension due to Fonda's declining health. He died shortly after filming Wrapped, and Hepburn was devastated. She considered his performance the finest of his career, and felt privileged to have been his co-star. Chapter 12, Television Work and Recognition. Her later career saw a flourishing of work on television, a medium she had previously shunned. She won a Primetime Emmy Award for her performance in Love Among the Ruins, 1975, again directed by her old friend George Cukor. She also starred in notable television films such as The Glass Menagerie, 1973, and The Corn is Green, 1979, proving that her talent was timeless and could adapt to any format. In 1973, she also appeared on the popular children's program The Dick Cavett Show, delighting a new generation of audiences. Chapter 13, Her Unique Fashion Sense, The Trousers Revolution. One of Hepburn's most enduring cultural contributions was her fashion sense. In an era when women were expected to wear dresses, skirts, and high heels, Hepburn wore trousers. She was one of the first women in Hollywood to do so regularly, and she made it a signature of her style. She refused to wear dresses in her films unless the script absolutely demanded it, and she was known to wear men's suits, slacks, and jackets in her daily life. It was a rebellion, she later admitted. I hated skirts. They were impractical and cold. And I didn't want to be a sex object. I wanted to be a person. Her androgynous look, with her high cheekbones, angular face, and short hair, challenged conventional notions of femininity, and inspired generations of women to embrace comfort and practicality over fashion dictates. Chapter 14, Political Activism and Social Causes. Hepburn was never a conventional political activist, but she was deeply committed to progressive causes throughout her life. She supported civil rights, women's rights, and reproductive freedom, consistently speaking out against injustice and inequality. She refused to star in films that she considered demeaning to women or African Americans, and she was one of the few white actresses of her generation to insist that black actresses be paid equally for their work. She also supported various charities and organizations, including the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Organization for Women, and Planned Parenthood. She never spoke of her charitable work publicly, considering it a private matter, but she quietly donated millions of dollars to causes she believed in. Chapter 15, Her Writing, Two Memoirs and a Unique Voice. In her later years, Hepburn became a writer, publishing two well-received memoirs. The Making of the African Queen, 1987, offered a witty and honest account of the legendary shoot in the Congo, and Me, Stories of My Life, 1991, provided a broader look at her remarkable journey. Both books were written in her distinctive voice, honest, irreverent, and full of self-deprecating humor. I've made a lot of mistakes, she admitted in the books. But I've also made a lot of good choices. I've been very lucky. And I've worked very hard. She approached writing with the same discipline she brought to acting, working for hours each day in her New England home, surrounded by the natural beauty she loved. Chapter 16, Her Friendship with George Cukor. Among all her professional relationships, her friendship with the director George Cukor was perhaps the deepest and most enduring. They made 10 films together over 4 decades, including A Bill of Divorcement, Little Women, The Philadelphia Story, and Adam's Rib. Cukor understood Hepburn in a way that few other directors did. He knew how to channel her intelligence and intensity into powerful performances. Hepburn and Cukor were also close personal friends who spent holidays together, traveled together, and supported each other through personal crises. She once said, "George was the only man I ever met who completely understood me. He was like a brother to me." When Cukor died in 1983, Hepburn was devastated, losing one of her closest confidants. Chapter 17, Her Work Ethic, The Discipline of a Legend. Hepburn was renowned for her extraordinary work ethic. She was famously punctual, often arriving at the studio hours before the rest of the cast and crew. She studied her lines relentlessly, refused to use cue cards, and demanded the same professionalism from everyone around her. She was known to practice a scene dozens of times until it was perfect, frustrating some directors, but earning universal respect for her dedication. "I'm not a natural talent," she often said. "I have to work at it. I have to study. I have to practice. I'm like an athlete, I train." Her discipline extended to her physical health. She swam every morning, ate simple meals, and never drank or smoked. She lived to be 96, a testament to her healthy lifestyle and iron will. Chapter 18. Her eccentricities and quirks. Hepburn was legendary for her eccentricities. She often wore the same outfit for days, refusing to change clothes unless absolutely necessary. She considered shopping a waste of time, and rarely bought new clothes. She lived simply, despite being a millionaire, and believed that material possessions were a burden. She also had a reputation for being blunt to the point of rudeness. She once told a dinner guest, "You're boring me. Please leave." Another time, she informed a producer, "I don't care about the money. I just want to be in the best film." She believed in honesty above all else, and if she thought someone was being insincere, she would say so directly. She was also famously forgetful, sometimes forgetting the names of her own co-stars, and once, her own father's name. Chapter 19. Her final years, the enduring spirit. Even in her late 80s, afflicted by a progressive neurological disease similar to Parkinson's, she continued to act. Her final screen appearance came in 1994 with a small role in Love Affair, which she accepted after her friend Warren Beatty begged her to do it. By this point, she was frail and had difficulty speaking clearly, but her fierce spirit remained unchanged. She spent her final years in her beloved Connecticut home, surrounded by the natural beauty she had loved since childhood. She continued to swim in Long Island Sound until her mid-80s and remained intellectually curious until the end, reading constantly and discussing politics and philosophy with her family and friends. Chapter 20. Death and Legacy. On June 29, 2003, at the age of 96, Katharine Hepburn died peacefully at the family home in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, the same house in which she had grown up. She passed away surrounded by her family, with her nephew holding her hand. Her death was reported worldwide, and tributes poured in from across the globe. President George W. Bush called her one of our greatest artists and an American original. His predecessor, Bill Clinton, said she taught us what it means to be a woman of strength, intelligence, and integrity. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from her own words, written in her autobiography, "Life is hard. After all, it kills you. But if you live it with courage and intelligence, it's worth living." Chapter 21. The record that stood for decades. For 55 years, Hepburn held the record for the most competitive acting Oscars, with 4 wins. Her record was finally tied in 2023 when Frances McDormand won her 3rd Oscar, and in 2024 when Meryl Streep won her 4th, but Hepburn's achievement remains legendary. She won her Oscars for Morning Glory, 1933, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, The Lion in Winter, 1968, and On Golden Pond, 1981, a span of nearly 50 years, demonstrating her remarkable staying power. Chapter 22. The American Film Institute and the Greatest Star. In 1999, the American Film Institute named her the greatest female star of classic Hollywood cinema. She beat out legends like Bette Davis, Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, and Elizabeth Taylor. It was a testament not only to her talent, but to her enduring influence on the culture. Hepburn had no interest in the accolade and did not attend the ceremony. She quipped to her biographer, "They are all dead, aren't they? I'm just the one who survived." But the honor was a fitting recognition of a career that had redefined what a woman could be in film and in life. Chapter 23. the enduring influence. Katharine Hepburn's influence extends far beyond film history. She was a pioneer for women in every field, showing that intelligence, independence, and strength were not threats to femininity, but expressions of it. She inspired generations of actresses, including Meryl Streep, Kate Winslet, Emma Thompson, and Sandra Bullock, all of whom have cited her as a role model. Her refusal to be typecast, her insistence on choosing her own roles, and her determination to live life on her own terms continue to resonate today. She was a feminist before the word was widely used, an iconoclast in the truest sense of the word. She proved that you could be a superstar and still maintain your integrity, that you could be successful without sacrificing your principles. Conclusion: the indomitable spirit. Katharine Hepburn once said, "If you obey all the rules, you miss all the fun." She broke rules her entire life, the rules of fashion, of femininity, of Hollywood convention, and of social expectation. She did it with intelligence, wit, and an indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished. She was not merely an actress, she was a force of nature. She was a woman who refused to be diminished, who insisted on being seen and heard on her own terms, who loved passionately and lived vigorously. In the end, she did not just play strong women, she was one. And her legacy, as a performer and as a person, continues to inspire anyone who dares to be themselves. As she wrote in her autobiography, "I have no regrets. I've done what I wanted to do. I've lived my life. And I've enjoyed it. What more could anyone want?"